So I am no more than another stolen relic, locked up here until you might have use of me.
Why'd you twist my words?
You could have told me what I was from the beginning. Why didn't you?
You're my son. I wanted only to protect you from the truth.
Well, because I'm the monster parents tell their children about at night? You know, it all makes sense now why you favored Thor all these years. Because no matter how much you claim to love me, you could never have a frost giant sitting on the throne of Asgard.
This is Next Door Villain.
I'm Tiana.
I'm Joe.
In this podcast, we practice empathy by discussing fictional villains.
Because if we can learn to understand characters that were designed to be hated, then we might just have a chance of understanding the real-life villains we encounter every day.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Next Door Villain. Here we're gonna talk about Loki, which is the last episode of the season. Can you believe that, Joe?
I absolutely cannot believe it.
Wow. It's been a good time. You know?
Yeah, it has. For a couple of people with absolutely no podcast or audio editing experience, it's been a ride.
Yeah. And I think we've definitely improved, you know, taken a look at what we've done, how we need to improve, and going forward in making even better episodes for next season.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be a season 2, and maybe we should have an episode sometime in the next couple weeks to just give a little info about season 2 and how it's going to work.
Yeah, that sounds great. And we'll still be calling for more literary pieces to be shown for everyone to hear.
Yeah, so even though this is the last episode of the season, keep your eye out for a little extra episode sometime in the next few weeks, and maybe we'll even release some special bonus content throughout the summer, and I don't know.
Ooh. Yeah.
The world is our oyster, or whatever.
It is. So it was my decision to do a Loki episode, because I really like Loki. Joe, do you like Loki?
No, I really don't care for him.
That's probably because you're straight.
I guess I don't know how that factors in.
You're right. Okay. So, okay. Let me back
I get
up.
it now. I get it. But go ahead and explain.
Yeah.
What you're going to say.
I really like Loki. I don't know why. Well, actually, I do know why. And so, like, Tom Hiddleston, the actor who plays Loki, also talks about this a little bit in the interviews, how when he got the part of Loki, people who are into the Marvel Universe just went insane for Loki. Just like he would go to Comic-Con and women and men alike would just scream for him. And people would, you know, do Loki cosplay. And it was really cool, just the different versions of cosplay that people would do for Loki. And so for one thing, Tom Hiddleston is very attractive. So therefore Loki is attractive too. And when you also combine that with power and also being very confident, that it's also very attractive. And so I think Tom Hiddleston is also very hot as hell, and I'm very jealous that Taylor Swift got to tap that, even if it was temporarily. But
Taylor Swift and Tom what's his name? Hiddleston.
They dated for like a week or something. I don't know. Wow. Maybe longer for that. I don't know. But I don't know who he's dating now. But I was just like, whew. Yeah, Tom Hiddleston.
I'll be honest, I just don't get it.
Yeah.
I don't see it. I don't think he's, you know, I don't think he's unattractive by any means, but he just doesn't seem like the heartthrob that everyone seems to be making him out to be.
I know, but he's just so like suave, and I don't know.
Is he though? He's kind of maybe Tom Hiddleston is, but Loki is kind of awkward and goofy and kind of like a punk. And I don't know. He's.
But then you combine that in the pot, right? Punkiness with attractiveness, with power, with I don't know. I guess sometimes there's not a logical explanation. Sometimes you just see Loki and you're like, hot damn. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you see Loki and think that.
Yeah.
You know, we haven't even given our listeners an explanation of who Loki is. Some of them might not know.
Yeah, that's true. Some might know everything about him, but yeah.
I suppose you probably didn't make it this far into the episode if you didn't have some idea of who Loki is, right?
Maybe.
I would have given up, honestly, if I started this podcast and had no idea who Loki was.
It'd be funny if someone was like, "Oh, I study Norse mythology. I would like to hear about Loki."
Yeah, we should clarify it as not the Loki we're discussing, though. Actually, you know what? I don't want to say too much more because I'm gonna lose things to say in my 30-second summary.
You better not use that up.
Yeah.
I think I'm going first.
Yeah, if you want to. Okay. 30 seconds to tell us everything there is to know about Loki. 3, 2, 1. Go.
So Loki was found by the king of Asgard when he was a baby, and he was blue, and he used to be a frost giant, but then he was kind of like adopted as a prince of Asgard, and so then he and Thor were brothers, but he always hated Thor, and then he tried to conquer Earth, but then he was defeated because of the Avengers, and then he tried to go and avenge his mother's death in another one, and then he faked his death, and then he came back as Odin, funny enough, and but then Thor was like mad at him, and then in Infinity War, bad things happen.
Nice.
I felt like a debater. Okay. Okay. 3, 2, 1, go.
So Loki is a person who is of royalty of the royal line in this place called Asgard, where the leaders are like gods, and his brother is the god of thunder, and he's really powerful, and he's like the god of mischief, and these are based on Norse mythology loosely. So Loki's the god of mischief, and he's not actually royalty. He was adopted, and so he's really jealous of his brother because he wants power and he can't have it.
Like the ending.
I could tell you were pretty skeptical when I started.
Because you're just like, he's like of like royalty, like no shit, no.
Yeah, I should probably mention that I'm super hungover.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So my voice, which is generally pretty flat to begin with, is especially flat today.
Yeah, this is why we don't record on Sundays, but this weekend is an exception.
Yeah. Yeah, our 30-second summaries are a competition. If you're a listener, you know that. You can go onto our Twitter @nextdoorvillain to vote for who did a better job. It's just kind of for fun. There's no real winners and losers, though I've usually been the loser.
Wah, wah. Yeah.
But you can go on our Twitter page and you can vote for who did a better job.
Yeah. Do it. Great. So now to start our conversation on Loki. Loki, also what I forgot to mention, is the god of mischief, is what he's been named.
Yeah, I said that in mine.
Oh, you did? Oh, good job.
I did.
Thank you. Points for you.
You're welcome.
5 points for Gryffindor. Oh.
When you missed that in your intro, I knew that was a great thing I could put in
there. Yeah, that's good. Okay. And so to kind of start off to talk about who Loki is and why he does what he does. Obviously, kind of an obvious thing that happens, of course, in one of the Avengers films is that he's like the primary villain who tries to actually conquer Earth. And the Avengers defeat him. And part of course, like the deep-seated reason that kind of cultivated him and who he is and why he wants to defeat Earth and conquer Earth is just this constant issue that he's had with his brother as like kind of like sibling rivalry. His brother Thor has always been meant to be king, most likely because he's older, right? And he's he's always been known as the Prince of Asgard who's going to be the king. And so, of course, in the movie, you also get the sense that Loki feels like he's in the shadow of his brother. And what did Thor do that I didn't do in order for me to be king? Because we're both powerful, we're both gods, and we're both people who can rule, it feels unfair to him that his father has just always prized Thor more than Loki.
And the truth of the matter is that there's some truth to the fact that he feels like he's not cared about as much, whether or not that's actually true, because he is actually an adopted sibling, and the species that he was adopted from, he's actually a different species, was the enemy of the Asgardians. They're like their biggest enemy. And so he kind of has that, I think he has that feeling that even though his parents love him, they're always kind of going to have this little negative feeling about him because he's part of the species that they all hate, and he's grown up learning that these people are terrible people and they deserve to be hated, and that's probably fostered a lot of sadness and confusion in himself, because he's like, well, that's my species, but I'm not terrible.
Right, yeah. And his father has actually killed a lot of frost giants, which is the species that he has. So then when he found out, he didn't find out until much later that he actually was a frost giant. But after he found that out, he was like, wow, you killed these people who are kind of technically my people, technically not, but there's a lot of like identity issues going on in him too, where he's like, I'm Asgardian, or I'm not Asgardian, I'm a frost giant, and so you just kind of see this like confusion that he has, especially when he like first tried to like be on the side of his biological father, but then turned around and then killed his biological father when he tried to kill his adopted father, Odin. So it's just this like mayhem of like feelings, right? And so it wasn't until after he found out about this too that he wanted to take action to even like conquer Earth.
Yeah, I think that's really a driver of his character and his actions, is the fact that he doesn't feel fully connected to his family, and that he's never going to have the kind of like power and leadership abilities as his father and his brother, and there's all this jealousy inside of him. I guess he's kind of like the emo god,
and he's just like naturally the black sheep because he's like the god of mischief, right? Like he's just like this punk kid, as you said earlier, who like does all these tricks and does all this weird stuff, and he's not like a proper prince, or and he doesn't look as good as Thor or something according to other people, but
yeah, not according to you.
So, and he's like, and so this is kind of like obvious, which kind of makes him a likable villain, because they kind of showed this story of Loki, in one of the movies, and so people just naturally kind of already know this part, but it's good that we brought it up. Yeah.
Right. He's a very relatable villain in that way, that we do get so much of his really tragic backstory, and I think a lot of people can find something to connect with him, some feeling that's within him to connect with. Even me, for example, I grew up with a couple of brothers, and I felt like kind of like the black sheep of the family, because they were both interested in the same things and they were different than my interests. So I feel like I can kind of connect with him into that feeling of not quite feeling like he belongs in the family. Of course, I didn't go out and try to destroy the entire earth and become the ultimate ruler.
Yeah.
I just, moved away from home.
Yeah.
So we all deal with things differently.
Because you as a human would be like, a mortal human who only lives like 80 years would be like, oh, in order to cope with this, I'm going to go move out. Loki as a god probably thinks, in order for me to cope with this, I know I'm a god and I know I'm royalty, so I know that I'm supposed to rule something. And so he's probably thinking, like this is just what I have to do. Like this is just life. I need to rule it.
Yeah. So one of my struggles with Loki is that I feel like he's very sympathetic. And you see him, I think, throughout the Marvel movies, kind of having this internal struggle between doing the right thing and doing the wrong thing. Like, so he does the right thing because he like desires this love and companionship, but then he does the wrong things because he has this desire for power and strength. And it's an internal conflict that he has. But I think the struggle is that he's such a sympathetic character that it's easy to forget how terrible the things that he's done are, which is the opposite of what we're trying to argue in this podcast. But
Yeah.
I think it goes to show that there's a risk in getting too sympathetic when you're thinking about people who do bad things. I think the reason it's important to be sympathetic towards people is because if we understand them, we can approach them in a different way. If we understand why Loki does the terrible things he does, maybe we can rectify it by solving those problems in his life rather than killing him.
Yeah. And he always tries to like look out for himself too, which is why I think he keeps going back and forth between like doing this good thing for this one person, but then turning his back on them and doing a trick in order to get a benefit from someone else for himself. And maybe that's because like through growing up, you know, if he has these parents who only look to his brother Thor and only pride Thor, of course, you know, you're going to grow up kind of thinking about yourself, maybe as kind of even like a coping method, as like a survival method. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I feel like I look out for myself more than I should, right? And maybe just recognizing that Loki does that maybe helps us also maybe to step back and see, okay, why am I being kind of selfish and taking things for myself? Recognizing why you do that so that you can turn around and rectify that and be more of a person who helps others. Loki is really likable because you're right, he goes in between villain and hero a lot. And a lot of people do that too. That's kind of how he's relatable, that we're not just completely bad or good. We go in between just like Loki does. But he also does another thing that's really cool about his power. He changes himself like physically even then, and just really masks himself and becomes different versions of himself to reach a certain goal. Like, for example, in one of the movies, he uses the fact that he's a villain for good. Like, he tricked the dark elves by saying like, oh, I'm totally evil. Or he didn't say that exactly, but I'm on your side. I don't like Thor because you know from my past that I didn't like Thor that time either. But then it was a setup for Thor to come back and defeat the dark elves. And then he just like changes himself into like different people. And I just thought it was interesting that he could like use his bad past for good and but also like kind of morph himself and deceive others. And deception is not necessarily good, but it's something that certainly happens and is more common than we think. Like, we all use different versions of ourselves to complete or succeed in things. Like, if you go to an interview, who I am in that interview is going to be completely different than who I am really. Maybe. Or like if you're running for office, you're going to be a different version of yourself than who you are, you know, at home. And it's all forms of deception. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad, right? Like, we don't know if mischief equals villainous, and deception might be able to be used for good. And I think that's just a strong quality that Loki has.
Yeah. And I think, so what you said about that politicians, for example, act differently when they're running for office than they do when they're hanging out with their friends.
Probably not Trump, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Most politicians try to present themselves in the best possible light. And I think one of the reasons that we do that when we're running for public office or in a job interview or meeting new people is that we're scared that the person we actually are is not going to be accepted. And so we present the best qualities of ourselves first because we think that's what's going to allow us to be accepted. And so I wonder if that's part of what's going on with Loki. I wonder if sometimes he enjoys presenting himself as different people because he's uncertain about himself as a person. And so he's exploring other versions of himself and presenting himself in different ways. They're going to work better because it's more comfortable for him. It's kind of a stretch and it's kind of wild speculation, but I feel like that could be a part of why he is so comfortable using that tactic. So he presents himself in a way that will allow him to accomplish that thing, or that he perceives will allow him to accomplish that thing, because he's presented as the person who could actually do it, because he doesn't think that he could actually do it.
I see what you mean. Because he knows that if he becomes someone else, that person might have more power than he does to accomplish that. And that also goes into why, like in Thor Ragnarok, when he faked his death, right? And then pretended to be Odin, his father, for like 4 years. I read that he did that for 4 freaking years. Just Odin, like, that's kind of exhausting. But but he knew that, like, if he would have gone back to Asgard as Loki and would have told everyone, okay, Odin is getting old, I'm gonna need to rule. Thor is, out protecting the 9 realms. I'm gonna need to rule. None of the people of Asgard probably would have wanted Loki to rule, or just because of his reputation. Mm-hmm. So he knew that he needed to be Odin in order to accomplish that goal of ruling. And I mean, it's funny because, like, in the movie, he's just kind of like chilling out, eating grapes or whatever. And then Loki, but then when Loki's found out, he's like, well, Asgard has been doing well. Like, it's been flourishing economically. And of course, he hadn't been, like, protecting the 9 realms like he's supposed to, because Thor had been doing that instead. But it kind of showed, like, okay, maybe Loki does have some good potential with ruling, right? Maybe, maybe he can do it, even though he's kind of full of himself. But maybe he can do it.
Like, if we would have just believed in him.
Yeah.
From the start, he wouldn't have had to do all these bad things. He could have just been a great
ruler.
Yeah.
They could have just, like, tossed a coin as to who's going to be king. And then maybe Loki would have accepted that more than just, oh, Thor is better than you.
Yeah.
I don't know.
There's also kind of the thing where sometimes it's easier to feel comfortable and to be yourself when you're in costume.
Yeah.
So I was a mascot for a period of time in college.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. And I'm generally like a pretty shy, not super outgoing person, but when I was in the mascot outfit, I felt really comfortable to, run around and do goofy things, and it never bothered me, but I never would have done those things if I wasn't in costume. Mm-hmm. So sometimes, putting yourself in a certain outfit can make it easier for you to do things. So like Loki presenting himself as Odin, maybe it made it easier for him to feel comfortable being a good leader, whereas he maybe doesn't know if he can do that when he's presenting as himself.
Right. And then also going into talking a little bit more about morphing oneself, kind of as like a side note, in the Marvel comics, Loki is reincarnated into a woman, and also in like Norse mythology, Loki also morphs himself into an elderly woman. He also has some like queer coding going on too. And then also like a Marvel comic writer said that Loki is bisexual. I don't know like how else to find out that information, but a comic writer said that.
Yeah, I think that there, and the super fans don't quote me on this, but I think there are a couple like series or like comic series. I don't really know how comic book series work, to be honest, but I think there were a couple that were written where that was, part of the actual storyline.
Right. Yeah. And so I guess all I can say about like gender bending and the queer coding of Loki is that, spoiler alert, although Loki died in Infinity War, I hope that if Marvel brings him back as a woman or as someone who goes in between genders, or even shows in the movies that he's bisexual, I hope that he becomes less of a villain, so that maybe at least one person with queer coding in Disney could be a positive role model. Because Disney's owned by Marvel now, by the way. Yeah, did you have anything else to say about that?
No.
Okay,
really.
Sounds good.
Well, just a random thought that I had. I don't even know if it like really relates, but we'll see how it comes out. This could kind of play into as a part of his whole character, where he does present himself in a lot of different ways. In a sense that could also be a little bit of evidence that maybe he does question his identity, or question like how he fits into the world, and as a character who's bisexual and doesn't see a lot of other people around him that are like him. Maybe he's confused and questioning. Maybe that's one of the reasons he uses, or he's trying out all these different bodies, which he has the ability to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think you wanted to talk about kind of the connections to Norse mythology.
Yeah, I did. Especially because, like, I didn't really know that Marvel used Norse mythology as kind of like inspiration. Okay, they kind of like loosely use Norse mythology. It's not right, like the stories aren't exact or anything. But I guess if you apply like thinking about Norse mythology to Loki and like why he does what he does, I was thinking about how I'm not someone who studies mythology, but people who have studied mythology talk about the fact that Loki in Norse mythology is also a trickster character, and he tricks people and he's mischievous. And he's a god who wreaks havoc wherever he goes. And he's kind of created to either help the main character or stop the main character from completing whatever goal they're going to complete. So he's created for that reason. And so kind of means to me that you can't really change who Loki is. He's just like created and as always maybe even known about this and his place in this world and who he is. And it's just kind of in his DNA, right? And in Norse mythology, being the trickster figure to me kind of seems like it's necessary. My theory is that the trickster figure is necessary so that people who read these stories and know about these stories know that it's possible to deviate from the norm in society. That it's possible that if you don't agree with something that's happening in society, then you can be someone who might not have as good of a reputation, but as someone who can make change, especially within the powerful forces in that society, to change society, kind of like what Robin Hood does. Robin Hood is a trickster figure, and so is Loki. So his purpose is to kind of show people that you don't have to abide by what the royalty says, right? You can also change the course of where society is going, and you can change the course of action to make a change that you think is good or better by being devious.
Yeah, and to Loki's credit, the fact that he's based on trickster gods. Tricksters are very common in the mythology for many, many different cultures. And one kind of thing they generally have in common is that they're really intelligent and they think really complexly.
Yeah, and Loki thinks really freaking fast.
Mm-hmm.
Like, my theory is that in Infinity War, I don't think he died. I think that was just another illusion, is my theory. But I'm sure other people would say, no, he's probably really dead or something. But he's smart. I don't think he is actually dead. Because I don't want him to be dead. That's probably why I think he's not dead.
Well, I think that even if he is dead, he's popular enough with the ladies and men that... For financial purposes, Marvel will find a way to bring him back. Yeah. Please bring him back for me. Reincarnate him. Even if it's a woman, still be attracted to her. I think that seems like a good place to wrap it up today.
Yeah, sounds good. Go drink some water, Joe.
Okay.
So now we can go to the next portion of our podcast, which is our literary piece, which can really showcase the villain and who they are, oftentimes in a way that a conversation cannot. It can really dive deeper into the villain and who they are and why they do what they do in their respective fictional stories. This week's literary piece is a short story written by me, Tiana. I wasn't really planning on writing a story for Loki because I was mostly looking forward to Loki submissions, but we didn't get any. Which is understandable because sometimes we can't always give out monetary incentives for people to write stories for our podcast. Joe and I, we don't make money off of this podcast yet, so it's not really quite possible. But I do want to reiterate that, next season we are going to have a whole brand new batch of villains. And we would love it if people would submit literary pieces for them because there are other benefits to doing so. If you want to be a writer or you really want to showcase that artistic part of yourself, you can really, really showcase your art on our podcast that people listen to, and people listen to it. They certainly do listen to our podcast. It can give you some more experience in writing. It can also help give you an idea of what to write about in case you're having a writer's block. And we definitely will showcase your name and give you all the credit for writing that literary piece. So that's just my pitch for other people just writing literary pieces. This week is my fictional story. I've never written a fictional story before, but I guess here it goes. I started off this season with my own poem. Now I'm ending the season with my own fictional story. So please enjoy. Loki, Prince of Asgard, sits on the edge of the western high pedestal on the palace and looks toward the rivers that flow through the city, enveloping every glistening building and flowing around every walkway in the valleys that lie beyond his vision. The sun was setting, the same sun that sets for the planet Earth, a planet in a different realm than this one. Clouds were in the sky and carbon dioxide helped to fuel luscious trees near the harbor. How similar we are to Earth, Loki thought, but how pathetic it is that those who lived on Earth could not make their own land look as marvelous as this scene. How they could not simply make gold and silver skyscrapers that touched the edge of the ozone layer. Loki had not been to Earth, but he had seen photos of this sharp contrast. Must be the people themselves, he thought. Perhaps they have a stupid leader. Or maybe the people are just that daft. Loki, turning 16 years old the next day, already had been developing a keen sense of the need to question things around him, and had begun establishing a reputation for saying things boldly about a variety of topics, like Asgard, other realms, life, and his life in particular. He also channeled what he thought into doing particularly bold things. Tonight at dinner, he had done something bold, but it was no surprise to his family members. His father, the king of Asgard, with quite a large appetite, had been furiously devouring a lamb carcass while Loki picked at his golden plate that contained bread, nuts, and a slab of lamb leg. He only ate the bread and nuts, and when the palace servant came to ask him about the leg, Loki simply dismissed it, saying that the meat was not up to his liking, since this very lamb had been his pet named Snarky. His pet lamb. Of course you are not satisfied with what we've given you, Loki, being selfish as usual. Odin, the king of Asgard, had proclaimed in between bites. The dining hall became silent, and the palace halls felt stiff. The servant glanced at Odin and then looked down, waiting for what could possibly come next. Thor, stuffing his face like his father without showing any acknowledgement to what was happening, blurted, "Oh, father, how could anyone not love this delicious meat? You've got to be ludicrous not to think of this as the best thing we've tasted in a long time." He was chewing in between words and drooling over his plate. Of course, Loki thought, Thor would butter up to his father like he did every other day. Also, he had eaten lamb for 5 times each day. Why was this lamb any different? What an ass-kisser. "You're right, son. So proud of my boy for knowing the importance of eating to grow his strong bones and muscles. That's important for a future king." Loki had always been smaller than Thor, so he knew this was a stab at his build. Not only that, but it was a stab at the fact that no matter what he did, he would only be the brother of a future king, but he would not be the future king himself. Suddenly, as Odin was gnawing on a thigh, a live lamb appeared in Loki's silk-padded seat, staring at Odin. Where Loki had gone, no one knew. No one had paid attention to whether he was still in his seat. Then the lamb carcass that Odin had been chewing on came alive. The rest of it had become a lamb head, bawing at Odin from the plate. Odin cried, "What monstrosity is this? Loki, where are you?" Thor's lamb had done the same. "Snarky?" Thor asked as he stumbled from the chair, crawling backwards on the floor, flabbergasted at the scene. The servant ran away, and their mother, Frigga, put down her knife and fork quietly, waiting for the chaos to pass. Odin stood up. "Loki, wherever you are, you will come here and stop this." Loki knew this was not uncommon for the royal household. He knew Loki had served up one of his pranks. As Frigga was sitting at her seat, she and her beautiful curly hair started turning into Loki's smooth, jet-black locks. Odin watched as his wife turned into his problematic son. In Frigga's chair sat Loki, smug and watching his brother and father gape at the live lambs they'd been eating. This wasn't even the first trick of the week. Earlier that week, the royal tutors had welcomed a new pupil to the group, a student named Morissa, a daughter of a wealthy councilman. He had just been promoted by Thor and Loki's father, so he could afford his daughter the same principal tutoring that Loki and Thor were able to receive as princes. She had long silver hair that reached her ankles and had blue eyes that shot deeply into your soul whenever you met eyes with her. Loki did not have as much interest in her, but his brother Thor became still the moment the royal tutor spat her name out of his mouth and into his brother's heart. Tutoring recently had been dull for Loki, and, well, suddenly discovering a weakness that his naturally strong brother had is something Loki could not pass up. Loki saw Thor's jaw drop in the corner of his eye and knew that he'd have a great opportunity to make Thor look like a fool in front of a person he very much wanted to be around. Loki masked himself as Thor, showing off his newly developed muscles and bright blonde hair. Loki was looking forward to making his brother, who had always seemed charming with every female pupil that walked through the door, finally feel the burn of what it was like to feel unwanted and odd. After the mid-afternoon tutoring session in the schooling quarters of the palace, Loki as Thor tapped on Marissa's shoulder. She turned around and saw, quote-unquote, Thor stand in front of her. Loki as Thor, then ready to do something ridiculous, had something else quite shocking spew out of his mouth. "I was wondering if you'd like to go to the flourishing market with me today, so that we can go together to look at and eat the succulent fruits." What? Why was I compelled to ask her this? I'm supposed to do something ludicrous, like acting like a monkey or telling her that she has a zit on her nose so that she dislikes Thor. What am I doing? Loki thought after he stated these words to her. Morissa blushed at Thor asking her politely to the market. Well, I guess I can't go back now, Loki thought. Loki as Thor and Morissa then went to the market. He bought fruits for her home. They watched the Asgardian birds fly over the rivers in the middle of the city and watched the shopkeepers yell at them, "Thor, great prince of Asgard, I would be honored if you bought from my stand." Loki as Thor and Morissa also walked along the river walk, and she asked him about his life. Loki as Thor, forgetting that he was still Thor, stated that sometimes it was annoying to be a prince because there was so much that he needed to do as prince, like going to awkward fancy dinners, training to fight to defend Asgard, and dealing with his father's expectations, all with knowing that he wouldn't be able to be king. Morissa was shocked. Wait, I thought you were expected to be king one day. Loki as Thor, suddenly realizing his mistake, said, "Oh, yes, you're right. Well, yes, I mean that I have all these expectations with knowing that I'll be king when the time comes." After he finished his slight issue, they began talking more to each other, and she told him about her dream to work for the king one day as a prominent musician for the royal family. They sat and ate their pickled carrots. At dusk, he walked her home, and they said they would see each other tomorrow. After she walked into her home, knowing he'd be safe to turn back to his original self, Loki as Thor went back to being Loki, walked to the palace, and slept that night feeling more content than he usually does after a well-thought-out prank. The next day, Thor was in the tutoring hall that morning as usual. Morissa then walked up to Thor. He was shocked at her sudden assertiveness in walking up to the next king of Asgard, but he was delighted given the fact that he was infatuated with her. "Thank you for your politeness, your company, and your graciousness, your highness. I hope to be a part of it again someday," Morissa stated while curtsying. Thor, very confused but satisfied that Morissa had spoken to him, sat down in his seat smiling. Loki watched the interaction from the background, smirking because Thor was confused, but then feeling sunken from the fact that she would never know it had been Loki she had enjoyed the warm day and fed bread to the birds with yesterday. Loki did not fret, however, and gave a nod to Morissa. She only slightly bowed and returned. They resumed their studies. Cut back to the incident at the dinner table, and Loki's father is wiping off his mouth, yelling to the skies about his son who can never let a normal day pass by. Loki, how dare you do this? And where is your mother? Do you know how it feels to have a son who can't have a decent meal with his family? Odin started throwing the forks at the wall. His strength and power even buried the forks into the side of the walls. The servants would have a hell of a time prying those out the next day. Can't you look at your brother? He gets the highest marks, he's growing stronger, and he knows that a person cannot get too attached to a damn lamb. Again, it's his father talking about his brother, and Loki glances at his brother's long blonde hair, elated chest, and disappointed eyes. What good is your power if you only use it for useless tricks? Odin bellows. How can I call you my son? You are but a mere child who cannot be a man. The lambs abruptly become carcasses again. There is no more buying. Loki leaves the table and walks out onto the west balcony, then climbs to the tower to sit on the edge to spend time away from his angry father and think about the planet of Earth when there is nothing else left to think about. I hope you're satisfied with yourself, Loki hears from behind him. Thor waits for Loki to turn around and see his brother waiting for him in the center of the tower. Loki glances back, but he forces himself to continue looking ahead of him towards the sky. I hope you're satisfied every day, Loki retorts. Thor walks closer to Loki. I think we should play a game. Oh yeah? Yeah. Whoever can beat each other up the most wins. Thor hooked his arm around Loki's neck and slammed him against the concrete, making him grimace in pain. Loki disappears after Thor has him in his grasp and appears behind him, summoning a rock and knocking it on the side of Thor's head. Loki then starts choking Thor as he has him pinned to the ground, and they start choking each other, rolling around in the hot cement, and then, although they are technically gods, start using good old-fashioned fists to beat each other for what feels like hours until they both have black eyes. Frigga, their mother, storms in. You boys, at it again with the fighting. What are you even fighting for? Clean yourselves up and go to bed. Their mother walks off, used to this kind of bantering. What were they fighting for? They didn't quite know. They stare and look at each other, Thor's fist still hanging in the air, and began laughing at the scene of what they were doing. Exasperated and sweating, they let their guards down and lie side by side on the ground, looking up to the sky. Thor, breathing hard, says after a pause, Brother, I am sorry that I ate your pet lamb, Snarky. I'm sorry I went out with your girlfriend. What? Never mind. Thor sat up. I hope that if we die someday, we don't die fighting each other. I hope so too, Loki responds.
And that's it for today's episode. If you have your own thoughts you'd like to share, feel free to send us an email at nextdoorvillain@gmail.com. You can also find us on Twitter at nextdoorvillain. Seriously, we love hearing from you, and we do always respond. Today's episode and every episode this season was produced by ourselves, Joe Anderson and Christiana Hennings, and we hope that you stick around for season 2. We've had a lot of fun, and we hope you have too. Thanks.